Hey everybody, this is Jesse P. Gilmore, Agency Transformation Coach and founder of Niche in Control, author of The Agency Owner's Guide to Freedom, and the creator of Leverage for Growth. I'm the host of the Leverage for Growth podcast, and I know that in order for you to scale your agency successfully, there are multiple shifts that need to happen within your mindset, skill set, and leadership style. I am on a mission to interview marketing and PR agency owners on their journey to 6, 7, and 8 figures and leverage the lessons from their journey to save you time, energy, and money to get your agency to the next level. If you find value in these episodes, watch the case study video to learn more about Leverage for Growth and how we successfully scale agencies at nicheincontrol.com/case study. That is nicheincontrol.com/case study. You are now listening to Leverage for Growth. Hey everybody, this is Jesse P. Gilmore, founder of Niche in Control and the creator of Leverage for Growth. Welcome to the Agency Leverage Edition. Today, I'm here with Nick Deck, the founder of Heroes and Sidekicks, a done-for-you agency helping founders and agency owners to build powerful, affordable, world-class teams. And this is not the first time that Nick has been on the show, but I'm glad to have him back. Thanks for coming to our show today, Nick.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me back, Jesse.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm wanting to do for this episode is actually talk about something that has started to come up a lot in the beginning of this year, where people start coming to me and us, because we're strategic partners, and they're starting to find that they're either burning out, they're too close to the trees to really see the forest, and they need to figure out some way of breaking free from this kind of like 50 plus hour work week where they're working in the business to working on the business. And we're going to tackle this as a case study, and we'll kind of go back and forth between it. And so that's kind of like the frame for it. If you could just give maybe like a 30-second kind of like, not an elevator pitch, but like a description of you and Heroes and Sidekicks a little bit more than what I have so far, and then we'll kind of dive right in.
Absolutely. I'll do my best to keep it succinct. So long-term marketer, took an agency from small to not as small pretty quickly, learned a lot along the way, wasn't as profitable as I wanted to be, learned how to build really effective offshore teams, didn't want to build a business out of it, just did it for us, but caught the attention of other folks. They needed help doing the same thing. We just kept getting better and better at it as we help people do it. And so that's our primary focus today. We do, about 90% of all the things that we do are related to finding and building great teams specifically for agencies and, folks in that space. We'll keep it to that,
Sweet. Awesome, man. Yeah. And I've been following your journey for the last 4.5 years or so. And also sent some clients over your way as well, and they're getting a good experience. So awesome, man. Well, let's dive into this story. For the sake of privacy, we'll use an alias, Joe. So we'll talk about Joe. And Joe is an agency owner. He's working more than 50 hours a week. Some weeks can be 7 days a week, leading towards not really having a weekend free for months. But what's more relatable to this is that he's gotten to a place where he just feels kind of like he's owning a job as opposed to a business. He's just too close to the trees, and he's trying to figure out, either how to delegate or how to free up his time to really focus around the visionary work. And a big piece of that is going to be based around hiring and knowing who to hire for and things like that, which we'll kind of unpack. But I want to focus the next 5 to 10 minutes or so on the hiring pre-work. Like how do you know you need to hire? There's that kind of like the saying of like hire when it hurts and hire slow, fire fast. There's a couple different mottos there. But I want to kind of set that stage. Do you have any questions about the Joe story as a case study that you want to kind of flesh out before we start tackling this?
Not even in the slightest, just because, I think that I've certainly lived it multiple times over. I've been Joe, and I know, every client that we've worked with. I don't think I know an entrepreneur that hasn't experienced the Joe case study in some way, shape, or form throughout their career.
Yeah.
Some are easier to, find it easier to get out of it. But there's a lot of folks that suffer through it painlessly, and it's a slog. And I think that, really excited to be able to talk about how you can go from that state to something that is far more efficient, far more, gives you the freedom of entrepreneurship that you were always chasing, always promised. So no, not at all. Ready to rock and roll.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I think it's important to understand a bit more about the symptoms and those kind of early warning signs, because a lot of times the Joe doesn't really know there's an issue until there's a kind of like a lack of motivation, or there's a lack of that pull towards like being excited about actually growing the agency. And I've talked with a couple agency owners that are kind of in that scenario. And sometimes they're actually at a place where either they're wanting to not take on new clients, kind of like new clients as a burden, or the clients that they have, it's like you're considering whether or not to get rid of clients to free back up your time. And I think a couple pieces of that as well is if you are going into your work week as an agency owner, and the clients, like even if they're just asking you something like that would be seemingly simple, and it just seems like, ugh, I can't believe I have to do that. I think those are some of those things, and even finding shortcuts to trying to like shortcut the work, or not focus on quality, is another kind of early warning sign. But what are some of the early warning signs that you would kind of point out as well?
I really like the points that you brought up, because I think that like your business should be something that if there is growth potential, you can pursue that growth potential. And in so many situations, you're right. Like people get to a point where they say, hey, I don't see a way for me to take on additional work. I don't see a way for me to take on additional clients. And in the same regard, like your life outside of your business should have a similar flexibility and freedom. Like you should be able to go and pursue the things that you want to pursue in your family and your relationship and things like that. And in a lot of situations, when you have to turn things down because you feel stuck in your business, if that's stuff in your personal life or in your professional life, that's a great indicator. I'd say that, one of the things that I encounter is people don't see how stuck they are, because it becomes this pattern, becomes this habit. They just normalize. Like this is just, there's been the whole, work hard, grind mentality that's been kind of drilled into the entrepreneurial subculture. And I think that people don't necessarily pay attention to the early signs. And so that it's only in many cases when it's really slapping them in the face that they really start to say, hey, I need to do something differently here. So I'm right there with you. It's a matter of like when you're sacrificing the growth and freedom in either your business or your personal life, that's something to really pay attention to.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you have like a spouse or significant other, just asking them, am I working too much? Am I stressed all the time? Just getting like a secondary person to give you some feedback is key. And I know that there's a lot of founders, like this is not the first time that they've probably heard this. So anybody watching this is like, oh yeah, I have to let go, or I have to get somebody else to do it. But and the interesting thing is that a lot of times they have a hard time letting go. Why do you think that happens?
I think that for most founders, especially in their, certainly in their first years of business, they're so used to being the person doing the execution. They are the expert and they are not the business owner. They're the person handling fulfillment early on. And they rarely start by having other people do the execution. And so they don't necessarily trust anybody to do it as well as they do. I think that in many cases, founders are going to do a better job at a lot of things than the team, but it doesn't always mean that it's not the right thing to move and hand that off to somebody else. I think that in certain cases, good enough or just beyond good enough, like there are things that you don't need to do the way that the founder does in order for it to be effective, in order for the client to have the same result. So like I think that for most people, moving from the person fulfilling to the person who's actually running the business and really kind of building the ship and building the team, and building the machine is a really challenging transition, because it's something they've never experienced. And it's a scary prospect, really. It's really it's a trust issue, because you and I both know there's a million and one people out there for every for every one good hire, for every one good person, there's a bunch of people who actually will let you down and won't necessarily live up to what they say they're going to deliver. And it's, in many cases, either they don't want to risk it, or in a lot of cases, they've had a bad experience once or twice, and therefore they're just like, hey, I can't hire for this. I'm going to hold on to this. I don't know. What is your experience with that? What do you see?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it is a mindset shift, because I think that in the founder's mind, when they're letting go of something, they believe that they had it perfect, right? And there's this perfectionism that kind of gets in the way of being able to let go. And I think that they also start to view it as this person will never do it as well as I do. And it kind of reminds me of this quote from Dan Martell. He wrote Buy Back Your Time. It was funny reading it. I was like, oh my gosh, like, has he gone through my time management module? but he talks about how 80% done by somebody else is 100% awesome. And I think that was a key kind of like motto, because if you can get somebody to do 80% of it, that's 80% that you don't have to do. And even if that means that you kind of lean into making delegation more based around non-value, low-level tasks to start, to really buy back your time, right? And start to look at how much time would actually be saved if you did that. And I'm trying to find those kind of like different pulls towards hiring, as opposed to more of a push where it just, sucks and then you have to hire somebody,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, pain being often a more powerful motivator, it doesn't necessarily have to be the only motivator. If you can be, so many of us are great planners, especially when it comes to the things that we're doing to serve our clients. But often in our businesses, we just kind of cobbler's children syndrome, where we're planning out all these wonderful things for our clients. We're really, going above and beyond. But then when we go to do the same in our business, it always gets pushed off. It always gets it's a lower priority item.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So now we understand the pre-work, kind of like the setup, the different kind of like mindsets that go into hiring. Let's move into the next 10 or 15 minutes or so based around finding and selecting the right people. So if we look at Joe's challenge, Joe might have tried hiring before. Or maybe he's in the middle of hiring and trying to delegate, but he ends up just micromanaging. So all the time that he would spend typically that would try to save his time, doing a certain task, he now just has to overlook everything that they're doing. And he's like, oh my gosh, I'm not saving any more time. And so what he really needs to do is he needs to find somebody who can take real ownership over a role as opposed to a task. And we could dissect that if we wanted to. But really getting it to where like very specific things are kind of taken over. So I guess my question, what do you look for in a hire? Maybe from like more of a macro view before we get into the specifics.
So I think that the most important thing that you and I have discussed in the past is like looking at what can be handed off, because there are things that you're just going to need to hang on to. I think that a lot of times in the agency space, you're going to need to remain the kind of chief strategist. And if you're in a smaller agency, like if we're just getting to the point where it's time to start hiring experts, you need to be the high level oversight of strategy, regardless of who's going to be doing the day-to-day fulfillment. But there are so many things that if you look at paid media as an example, a lot of the kind of campaign preparation and the actual execution day-to-day, the monitoring and optimization, the reporting, all that stuff, like that doesn't require someone with really high level expertise. If you can be in charge of, offer and helping craft some of the messaging and overseeing the creatives and things like that, it leaves the media buyer in a position where they've been set up for success, and they can go and, based on some of the audience work that you've done with them and some of the stuff that you've helped them do on, in the initial strategy planning for the client, they can go and largely be set up for success and run with that for a long time. And so I think that in that situation, you just kind of look at like, where are the most critical, mission critical activities that you do need to hang on to, and of the remaining, subset, what are the things that are going to be easiest to hand off? And the reason I bring up this expertise or this, handing things off to experts is because usually media buying in your agency is not going to look different to media buying in an agency they worked in previously, or, when they worked in a company previously. And so I find that even if you don't have systems, if you don't have all this documentation, if you don't have your processes documented, you can bring in an expert to take over and fulfill a task like that really fairly effectively. Like, you don't have to do a lot of onboarding and prep work in order to do that. And so that, to me, is like all your campaign management day to day, week to week, that can be handed off to somebody else really effectively. If you look at some of the more, I think, nuanced work of strategy, it's going to be really expensive to find somebody that can do it well, or somebody's not going to be able to do it as well. So it feels like that's stuff that you can hang on to. So when I look for who to hire, how to hire, what to look for in a hire, I think that the main focus is like, where are you spending the vast majority of your time, and how easy is it going to be to hand that stuff off? And so that's my starting point. Then we can get into the specifics of like what that hire needs to look like. But what do you think about that kind of, that high level checklist at first, like evaluating where to focus the hiring first?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it does depend on the size of the team. And so when we look at the size of the team of like the audience right now, so if you're an agency owner and you have a team of 3, right, or you're just solo, or you have a team of 5, it might be a little bit different. But one of the things that is consistent regardless of the size of the team is that you're hiring to get your time back. You're not hiring to grow the business, because if you hire to grow the business, it's actually just going to increase the problem. Because if your time right now is at capacity, and then you hire somebody to get you more clients, then it's going to be a vicious cycle. So my suggestion is, at least from kind of like an input, is figure out the time component. The other component, once you figure out what the time is, whether it is strategy with media planning or things like that, or if it is something as simple as your inbox and calendar. But being able to start freeing up that time so that you can focus on more of that vision. And you might still spend 50 hours in your business, but the majority of it starts becoming more working on the business is a big thing. Now, once you understand what the role is, I think it's really important that any one of the candidates that you look at, regardless of what position it is, they have 3 main characteristics that you're looking for. Being humble is one piece. They have to be able to take in feedback, right? And not be prideful, right? So humility is a big piece. Being able to be coachable is another thing. If they can take in feedback and be able to adjust and adapt based around the feedback to get to where you want to go, that's a key one. And then they have to be hungry. And hungry is not just like they need food. It's like they actually have to like want it. And I think that those are the characteristics, regardless of, the position, regardless of, cultural fit and things like that. It's the type of candidate that you're looking for, because if you give them what they need, they will thrive if they have those main kind of like innate characteristics. Have you heard those 3 before? I know I probably got it in some business book. I thought it was really good.
Honestly, it's like it's our version of the way that we say this is like, in many cases, you can hire rock solid technical talent, but if they're not an amazing human being, they're probably not going to be the right fit, because like you were saying, they're either not going to give it their all, they're not going to be deeply invested in the success of your clients, of your company as a whole. Oftentimes they're going to look for, their attention goes to the highest bidder. They kind of got the mercenary mindset there. And there's the lack of loyalty leads to a lack of longevity in the relationship, and hiring and rehiring and all that, it's just such a pain. Like, it's just, if you can retain your talent and work with that talent, like if they have all the raw materials for them to be a successful long-term candidate, I would sacrifice technical expertise in many cases in order to get somebody that's going to stick with me and put in 110% day in, day out. And I've learned that the hard way, honestly. Like, I've hired really, really smart marketers, but in the end, they were just there for, there was a quick stint with us, and then they were on to the next thing. And that's, if you look at the resume, oftentimes you see that they've bounced from place to place, and they're just kind of, they think very highly of themselves, and for that reason, they're never really content in a role for very long. And I want people to be proud of what they do and think highly of themselves, but not to a fault, not to a degree where they're, sticking their nose up at doing certain things. Like everybody on the team will sometimes have to do hard things that are below their pay grade, so to speak. And you need people that are just happy to jump in and get the job done, because especially in like the volatile agency world where things are unpredictable and campaigns can fail and there's technology that blows up on us and whatever there is, you need somebody who's like, if they see after hours that a creative has, a typo on it or something like that, they jump in and they either turn that ad off, or they, fix the creative themselves. They do that kind of thing because they know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge, man. Now for the next 5 minutes, what I want to do is I want to start looking at, aside from those innate characteristics, and you had talked about pride, which is the opposite of humility, as being part of it. So that was a cool tie-in. But when we start looking at finding the right people, and kind of the hiring process to make sure that you are finding the right candidates that both match, not only can they do the job, but do they fit within the team? One thing I would suggest, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about my process, and then you talk about yours, and we can kind of go back and forth. But once we understand, and kind of like you go through a kind of like a phone screen process where you're kind of just seeing, does this person kind of align with the position and what makes them interested in the position? Some of the questions that I ask in the way beginning, and I get a lot of agency owners to ask in the way beginning, are things like, tell me about your background. How does your background relate to this position? It's specifically what interests you in this position. What are your 1 to 3 year short-term kind of career objectives? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And from those questions, even in the way beginning, you can kind of start seeing whether or not their vision for their position is aligned with what you're trying to do. Once you get into that, I think that what's really important is, can they actually do the position? Do they have the expertise in there? So questions based around skills and position would be after that. And then lastly would be based around the culture, the organization, and where you're testing values based around scenario-based interview questions. But that's typically what I usually suggest. But what do you think about this?
I like to throw people to the wolves, and in the nicest way possible. What I mean by that is usually, so absolutely, like in a phone interview, if you're on a call with them, you can absolutely tell if somebody knows, I keep using the media buyer example, so I'm going to stick with that. But you can tell if somebody knows their way around an ads account just by the way that they talk about things. If they talk about things that they've been able to accomplish in the past. I like to ask people for portfolio examples and say, yeah, hey, I did, this cool thing with this campaign here, with this type of industry. It's fantastic. But like in many cases, people will make their portfolios look, it's only their best work. And, you never know how many campaigns failed and what the ratio of success versus failure is. So to me, when I'm on a call with somebody, like especially in this situation where you can say, hey, open, here's one of my ads accounts, or here's one of my my campaigns I'm running. Just walk me through what you would do here. And oftentimes I don't do that in a video, like a Zoom call. I'll do that as like the homework afterwards. I'll make sure that they, like, if they say all the right things and check all the boxes on the call, then I say, hey, go dissect, what would you do? What are the optimizations you would make on this campaign here, this campaign here? What's going on? What do you see that's not working as well as it could be? And I don't always expect, lots of times they're not going to be able to see like big glaring issues and errors. But if you can see their attention to detail by saying, they are picking out the little fine details and the little nitty gritty pieces, that's a wonderful thing, because they're not going to let those things slide. And it's typically on the job when they're actually like executing the campaigns themselves. And then, same goes for like, if they're speaking with authority, if they're speaking with confidence, if you can really hear the expertise in the way that they demonstrate, in the way they communicate their recommendations, even if they are fairly rudimentary or fairly, they're not big glaring issues. I think that that's really helpful, because I think if you are an expert in that space, especially like if you are, have a background in paid media, that's something where you're going to be able to hear somebody who knows what they're talking about versus what they're, somebody that doesn't. So I like that. And I think that as much as possible, my recommendation would just be give someone a hands-on homework assignment, unless there's, if it's a creative role, make sure that they spin up a couple creatives, do an example design for you so you can see exactly what they produce and what their work process is like and how they communicate, that kind of thing. Because I think that hands-on experience prior to the hire avoids, because like we'll talk about onboarding, I'm sure.
Yep.
I don't want to invest in like spinning up an onboarding and like, because I take it really seriously. I don't want to onboard somebody if they're not going to be a good long-term fit. So do the heavy lift up front, make sure it feels like they deserve to be onboarded, and then then you can go into that hiring decision with confidence. What do you think?
Oh, that's huge. And just going back to Joe's challenge, and he's tried delegating before. Now he's trying to figure out, the delegation and the hiring piece. And everything that we've talked about, both of us have given you given Joe different ways of looking at hiring, to take ownership and figuring out is this the right person? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be hiring based around convenience. Convenience meaning like the neighbor down the street says that they can do media buying, and then you're like, sweet, and it's like the only candidate. You actually want to do it based around competence. And what we've talked about is a lot of different ways of kind of looking at that, from the intro part of like figuring out what is the position you're going to be hiring for, then the innate characteristics, then going into the hiring process, both from skills and culture. And I think you brought up a really good point, which is getting somebody to actually show you how they think through a problem that is going to be relevant to that position. Very, very smart. And I think that that's a great idea. So now let's just say Joe finds a person, goes through the hiring process, does the short list, the person does the small project. Joe understands that this person has some expertise and is able to do it. So they hire him. And now we're starting to look at the onboarding process. So after the offer was accepted and you got a start date, Joe's fear is even if I find the right person, how do I ensure that they actually help me and don't just add more to the stress? And they might have had past experiences where they hired somebody, then felt as though it's easier to do it themselves. And really, a lot of times, what I've found at least, is that onboarding kind of prep process in the first day for sure, week, even month of that new hire, and kind of determines the relationship, the expectations, and a lot of different things to set them up. So before I get into kind of my thought process on it, what are some of the things that you would recommend any one of the people that work with Heroes and Sidekicks and they're starting off in that first day, week, month to really set up that new hire for success?
Perfect world scenario is that you have everything that you ever do documented, and people can just follow SOPs, start to finish. And you have this, wonderful welcome kit, and it talks about who you are and what you do and who your clients are and all. But the vast majority of people just don't have that. And so I'm not going to go in that direction. I would say that if you can set kind of a high level overview of expectations for the role in terms of when they're going to be working, what they're going to be working on, what their expectations are in that role in terms of like their scope of work, it's going to be really helpful for them to understand where their limits are, where other team members are going to be involved in the process of fulfilling for that client, things like that. I think that one of the things that I see often is, even in situations where everybody knows that they should have some sort of documentation, some sort of onboarding process, most agency owners, when they're hiring in Joe's scenario, they just don't have time to put that together. And so my fallback, which is often a very effective fallback, is just making yourself exceptionally available to the new talent, setting the expectation early on the interview, saying, hey, look, I'm swamped. I'm quite literally drowning in my own business right now. I need your help. I will invest in everything that I possibly can to make sure that you've got what you need, but I need you to be self-sufficient. I need you to ask questions. I need you to speak up when you're stuck. Can you commit to that? And if they say yes, no problem. That's a huge part of my personality. I just won't let things slide. Fantastic. You've at least set that expectation. And the way that I usually recommend people make themselves available is a couple different ways. So obviously you're going to have your communication channels, your Slack, your email, your whatever it is, there's going to be a way for you to communicate. But I like making sure that, especially for the first week or two as somebody's coming on board, the first onboarding call is going to be get them access to like their tools and their accounts and show them around the, who the clients are, show them around who the team is, like make sure that they get a good lay of the land. They don't have to remember everything. It doesn't have to be super comprehensive, but give them the super critical data points that they're going to need to just understand where they fit into the mix. Then the fastest way that I've seen people be able to effectively onboard somebody that is fairly self-sufficient is just setting like a daily check-in with them, making sure that they know, again, I have like my virtual door is wide open for you. Reach out at any time. I will get back to you as quickly as I can. I want you to ask questions because I won't have time to necessarily direct you and be as proactive with this, with the directions that I give you. But so make sure that they know they can reach out. They don't have to feel like they're bugging you, but also like set 15 minutes on the calendar every morning or every afternoon, just to make sure that they aren't stuck on anything. If they have questions, you guys can rapid fire back and forth, answer this, answer that, answer this, answer that. And then they're good for the next at least 24 hours. If they encounter something new throughout the day, they can message you. But if you can't get to that message because you are really drowning in your business, like at least you have 15 minutes to just answer some questions and they've compiled that stuff for you. And to me, that feels like you haven't set the expectation that there's not a misaligned expectation. You're going to have like you tell them up front, I am very busy. It's not going to be as nice as I'd like to make it for you. And then you provide an outlet or a channel so that they can get their questions answered at least in a daily touch point, and ideally throughout the day in quick Slack back and forth or something like that. So I don't know. What have you found to be effective when somebody's like Joe? What do you find to be most effective to help somebody onboard a new hire?
I like how you framed it back to Joe, because I was like, that's exactly what I do. And I set up playbooks and I give it to him, and all the stuff that you said, like it's like a perfect scenario, probably because I was in HR before, but yeah, in the Joe scenario, if you don't have time to kind of build an onboarding plan and you're kind of like literally drowning in your business, I think one of the most important things is you really hit it out of the park in that first day. The first day should be setting the vision for not only the company, but the role and how the vision and the role are connected in some form. And because if you have somebody that can be a self-starter, someone who you tell them to go, this mile in this direction and go, and then they just start booking it, and they start moving in that direction, they have to be aligned to something. So if you can get crystal clear on the company, understanding where it's going, to a place where it might not be as crystal clear, because if we're talking about Joe and you're too close to the trees to see the forest and so forth, the vision might just be this role eventually takes over this certain thing so that it frees up my time to focus more on the vision. That could be the thing that you're sharing with them, right? But that first beginning, I always use this thing called an hourglass method, where you start off, if they're coming in or it's virtual or whatever it is, you have some type of meeting. And in the way beginning, you're giving the access, you're making sure things are good. But the main kind of piece of it is that you're setting the stage for what's going to happen today, the week, the month, and what you're hoping to expect out of it. We use in our mastermind, we use this training kind of model called consciousness competence. For anybody that has never heard that before, just type it into Google. You'll see an image with it. But it basically walks people through, how do you learn? You go from awareness, where you're just exposed to things, but you're kind of taking it in as kind of like a sponge, to more of like the practicing piece. And then once you're practicing, you're starting to understand what's working and what's not. You still need oversight, some QA, kind of checking things. Eventually they become independent. And as they become independent, then they start shifting into being able to train somebody else. And if you can understand how that process works, it makes it a lot easier for you to take parts of the role and give them something easy that they can succeed at. And give them something very small that they can just win, because it builds momentum. So, and for anybody that is trying to figure out an onboarding development plan, if they watch this podcast, they find me on LinkedIn, and all they do is just send me a message that says onboarding development, I'll send you this whole model and probably a training on it to make it a lot easier. But I think that setting expectations, getting to understand that you're setting the stage for it, and that daily stand up is crucial, because it gives a feedback session, and 15 minutes is not, it's not a lot of time, but it will reduce the amount of ad hoc questions, meetings from the person that's kind of coming through. So I think I'm very aligned with what you were talking about a second ago.
Cool. And I mean, like, we don't have to get in the right now. We're talking about unburying Joe, but
Mm-hmm.
best case
Mm-hmm.
scenario, you're doing these daily stand-ups with a team regardless. Like, you have the team there. That's a touch point where they get to interact with the other, if using the meteor buyer example, they've got the creative on the line. They've also got, the copywriter there. If that's how you guys break up your team, and
Mm-hmm.
they can not only ask the questions, but they also get to build rapport. They get to hear what the other person's working on. So
Mm-hmm.
ideally, it's not just a 15-minute stand up. I like the idea of having a dedicated stand up so that they can have that time, but I like that to be something where that initial, I don't know, it depends on the complexity of the role and how much ramp time they need, but
Mm-hmm.
that gets to go away eventually. And then they just get integrated into the normal stand up at a point where they just, that's all they need. They have enough of a lay of the land where they just get to interact with the team as you guys normally do. And they still get that touch point to answer questions. So I just want to put that out there, because I have one particular not problem, but an issue where a sidekick right now is just not getting what they need from the client relationship, because they don't have any standing calls. They don't have, like, the founders really, like, detached from
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the day to day, and to a
Mm-hmm.
detriment to the team. It's not like detached where, he's not focused in the weeds. He's not doing things that are not necessarily things that he needs to be focused on.
Mm-hmm.
It's not giving his people the direction that they need. And so I'm actually working with said client to help implement something where it's fast, it's easy, but it does give the team what they need, so they don't feel, because what's happening is that person is getting reactive feedback, like
Mm-hmm.
weeks or months sometimes later, even though that person's been trying to resolve said issues, but they just they don't have a channel to do so. So putting it out there,
Mm-hmm.
like, that touch point, giving people easy access to you so that you can quickly just nip problems in the bud. I think
Mm-hmm.
that is, I wouldn't run a business without it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, totally. I think that that's a good point, and I want to spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes on this, and then we'll switch into the next kind of topic. But I think meeting structure is a big piece of being able to track and measure success without micromanaging. So you don't really, if I was to give anybody that's listening a meeting structure that has worked for my clients and also works for me, in addition to that daily stand up, if you set aside on a Monday a weekly planning session where you look back on the previous week and you say, here's what worked last week, here's what didn't work last week, here's what I committed to, and here's what my results were, and then get other people to do the same exact thing. What happens is that the culture of accountability starts to happen. And when you start to look at what's on the docket right now, this week, and what we're trying to accomplish as a team, being able to do that effectively and be able to set it up to where everybody kind of understands what the mission is and what they're trying to accomplish that week, that's really beneficial. Now, if you have a project management system and you use it in what's called a Kanban, like task board, where you have statuses going from not started all the way to completed, running a meeting where you're looking at the statuses from right to left, meaning closest to completion, and working your way left, is another way of being able to focus on work completion, like completing work, as opposed to just opening up a bunch of things and never actually completing it. So that's one part, as the Monday meeting. The daily stand-ups on a daily basis of 15 minutes, where you're just talking about the day. So instead of the week, it's based around the day. This is what yesterday was. Here's what I committed to. Here's what the results. Here's what I'm committing to today. If everybody just did that in a routine setup, you're starting to get to a place where people are owning their accountability, and you're getting an inside glimpse if they haven't updated the project management system or whatever else it is. For new hires for the first month, every Friday, have a check-in with them. It might be just like an addition to that daily stand-up, and where you're asking them one specific question which is rate your week from 1 to 5 on how much you are overwhelmed by the work. 5 being completely overwhelmed, 3 being just perfect, 1 being underwhelmed. That is super important for type A personalities because you can find out very quickly whether or not you're giving them enough work, or if you're giving them too much and they're overwhelmed and you want to focus on prioritization. That one open dialogue is super beneficial, and it'll save Joe from either underwhelming somebody who could take on a lot more, or overwhelming somebody because they're just dumping everything. And I think that meeting structure is really beneficial. I could go into so much more with it, but it minimizes the amount of questions and ad hoc meetings that you have. So when you're done with the meetings, like everybody's set up and you just start going. So anyway, what do you think about that meeting structure?
I'm all for that. And the only thing that I add, that I kind of work with clients on it, sometimes Mondays are very busy days, and I like starting the week off with a plan.
Mm-hmm.
But if Mondays just aren't the right day to have your weekly planning meeting, I want everybody to recognize that you can still operate in 7-day cycles no matter when you have that meeting. It can be on a Tuesday, a Thursday, a Wednesday, a Friday. I've done a lot of planning. Like it's Wednesday today while we record. I have a planning meeting with a client later this afternoon, and we just cover the last 7-day cycle. And so you have to be able to flex to what works based on your unique business, based on how things go in your business, based on I find also that for me, I have to ramp into the week a little bit. So on Monday, I'm not in go mode. And so having Monday be my planning, I don't get as strategic on Mondays as I do on Tuesday through Thursday, So just, you have to make the business your own. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about being an entrepreneur in general is this is your business, do what's right for you, do what's right for your team, and people will thrive in that situation. If you just adapt to the unique inputs of, your clients, your team, et cetera. But I won't run a business without those types of meetings. I have my Monday, Wednesday, Friday calls with my team, just the way that I do it. And it allows me to not talk to anybody before, after, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The team just handles it. If they, if they have something that comes up, a fire, if they get stuck on something, obviously a Slack message is totally fine. But it allows me to know that they are good until the next time we meet, at which point they're still usually pretty good. They have a couple questions. We resolve the issues, and then they're good to the next one. And it's just, to me, the time savings, so many people try to keep meetings off their calendar because they think that the meetings are the time suck, and they can be. But if you do your meetings right, the meetings free you up to have these big focus blocks or work with your clients on special projects or whatever. You can do the critical thinking work if you can do your meetings right. So I love the structure, and I think that it's something people don't do enough of, because I think a lot of people hate meetings, and that's okay. But I think that they are so beneficial, and in so many cases a necessary evil. You don't have to think of them like that, but if you see your meetings as a negative thing, try to reshape them so that they are as productive as humanly possible, and so that that when you have these meetings, it's saving you all the little back and forth with independent team members elsewhere, because that little 5-minute message or that little 30-second it adds up to be not only cumulatively probably more time, but also the context switching is just, it destroys my focus. That's for sure. I can speak to that personally, but I see it with basically everybody we work with. You don't want a million messages coming throughout the day because you just haven't taken the time to plan appropriately in the meetings.
Yeah, that's huge, because if we go back to Joe, I mean, he's at a place where he wants to make sure that he doesn't just shift from doing all the work to just managing all the work, and he's still in the same issue. And I think one of the greatest things that can happen is the open communication. And if you look back, and I won't go so far down the rabbit hole with this, but if you look at a CEO's role and you start to dissect the best CEOs in the world-class organizations, and their number one focus is just a free-flowing information. That's all they focus on. So I studied LinkedIn's CEO, or previous CEO, And he used to have very specific days. So, like Monday was leadership, and Tuesday was whatever. And those themes made it to where people realize that this is the time that he's going to focus on this certain topic. And if I need to bring it to him, this is the time that I'm going to do it. And if I bring it on the wrong day, he's just going to say, wait till next week. And so, if we think about that and everything that we've talked about so far, to make Joe not be just stuck managing the work, from the meeting structures to looking at the management of people, to minimizing the amount of task switching or context switching based around these ad hoc kind of requests. I think that's a big piece. But if we think about the shift that he's trying to make from being the person who does the work, not just all of a sudden becoming a manager, but more being a leader, what are some of those things that you would suggest for him that we maybe haven't talked about yet? Does anything kind of come to mind aside from the meeting structure and so forth?
That's a good question. I think that in a lot of cases, everybody talks about systems and processes in their own way. Like everybody has a different definition of what that means. But to me, it's all about just making the operations within your business predictable. However you document them, however you implement them. If you use a Google Sheet and that's all you just have a bunch of steps that somebody has to follow and it's a quick checklist, that's better than just assuming, like teaching somebody on a call or letting them kind of ad hoc figure it out and then assuming that they're going to follow that step all those steps every time. I think that regardless of how big your team is, what type of business you run, like I have never seen a business that is fluid and predictable and not experiencing the occasional big fire that really like makes the owner's life hell if they just operate flying by the seat of their pants. Like if you can, I think that as great as your people may be, as great as you may be, as great as your understanding as your clients may be, in the end, like you need to have an understanding of basically everything that you do documented in some way, shape, or form. I'm a huge fan. You mentioned the Kanban board. Like I'm a huge fan of making sure that everything is in the project management system and that like when something needs to be executed, I'm going to continue to use the media buyer analogy, but like if you're, going to go and deploy an ads campaign, you have to do the copy, you have to do the creatives, you have to go and deploy it, you have to go and have somebody one of the things I'll throw in here is like everything gets a quality assurance step. So like somebody else checks on the final deployment of whatever it is that you're deploying, a campaign, a website, whatever it is. Somebody else needs to review that. So I'm going to throw that in there. Like do not overlook that step because it will save you so many times. And it takes like 30 seconds for somebody else to look at this and say, yes, it's good or no, it's not. But going back to the predictability item, like it is often painful to sit there and do it. Most people won't necessarily they won't put it on their priorities list by any means, but most people forget that their team is usually like, if you have a team, their people are the ones executing these tasks day in and day out. And so they can, like you were saying, Jesse, they can do the 80% of the lift there. And then you just review it 80, 90, 100% in some cases. They may have the SOP just dialed in. I haven't personally written an SOP or built anything out, and I can't remember how long because the people executing the tasks are the ones that are responsible for doing that. And I make that as high a priority in some cases as some of the client work that they do and things like that, because I recognize that the only reason that my team can operate independently and the only reason that I barely have to think about running my business is because we know exactly what things need to be done in what order, by what person, at what date, and that somebody's going to check in and make sure that they got done correctly on time. So that I think, as much as that's a team-wide mandate, I think it really applies here, because when you have that for a new hire, what I can tell you is when somebody comes into our organization, it is very clear that if they're going to be doing this role, this is the process they follow. Like everything's in Monday. Everything is very, very clear in terms of what happens in what order and who's doing it. And so they don't have to really think about whether or not they forgot something, or they don't have to think about whether or not it was done correctly, because not only is somebody going to go in and make sure that it was done on time and done correctly, but it's just been spelled out in really plain English for them. So it's something that a lot of businesses don't necessarily do things as predictably, or especially early on. But as you get into, like, don't document something that will change next week. But as you get into having these systems that are like, every time I do it, deploy an ads campaign, this is what it looks like. Go and make sure that somebody's putting together just at least a simple checklist, at least something where it's like the steps that need to be done. You don't have to have really robust explanations. And I know that I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but what's your take on that in terms of, like, especially in terms of order of priority? Because it's something that many people will push off until the absolute last minute. And if anything comes in, they'll say, hey, it's going to the next week, next month, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes to systems, you're basically trying to make it to where a good effective system is where the person doing the work can follow the, like, if it switches, they can follow the system or follow the process or follow the SOP or whatever it is, to get a similar, if not equal, result. So if we just boil it all down into that's what systems are. And you think about the switch that Joe's going through from operator and he wants to become a leader. You have to build resources and build those systems to where Joe can effectively hand off something, tell them, here's a starting point, but eventually they want to take it over. If you're going to get to a place where they're taking over that role, they're going to have to be the ones that update the SOPs that, like you were saying before, that because they execute it on a day-to-day basis, they're going to be a lot closer to it. If someone who is listening right now has never built systems before, and they start to look at, how the heck do I get started with this? Do I have to build a project management system? Do I have to build a bunch of SOPs? My suggestion is two main things. It's called just-in-time standardization, JIT standardization. If you are in a process like an onboarding with a client, or like the media buying scenario where there's a setup process or whatever it is, just record yourself in a Loom doing it and start explaining what you're doing. I'm going over here. I'm clicking on this button in order for this certain thing to happen. I'm going to pull this information, these file assets from this certain file folder, whatever it is. Just capture it in some form. And when you start to capture it, you could either use that video or right after you do that task to make it visual. So before you're sitting in front of an SOP and trying to create the first version of it that eventually somebody else is going to take over, being able to give them a visual image of, this is the process. Here is what's called a trigger event, what starts the process, what's a closing event, how does it end the process. For onboarding, for an example, so it's signing the agreement and paying the invoice, and then maybe the closing event is having a kickoff call, right? You have to make it visual, because when you make it visual, you can have conversations about a process without getting so much into the weeds. It's kind of like you're looking at it. Those systems are the second component to making it to where you can transition. If you do not build systems and you hire a bunch of people, you have now created an issue in your business. And so I think that going back to the Joe scenario, if you're Joe and you do not have time to build systems, you don't know how to do it yet, but you've hired somebody, get into a job shadowing scenario where you're starting to do it. And then anything that you are doing that eventually you want somebody else to do, record it in a Loom video and slowly start building it out. But those systems are actually where you get the freedom from. The daily stand-ups, all that kind of stuff gives you inputs into what systems need to be built. And so there is no way that Joe can go from an operator to a leader without building systems. You can hire all the people and you're kind of rolling the dice, even if you have really good sidekicks, right? Mm-hmm. You're rolling the dice because you're going, I don't necessarily know if this person's going to work long-term. And that person that is not set up is very similar to the person that you were talking about in the example, where the sidekick is just not set up correctly because there's no systems in the communication and they don't have the assets. So I think, just to kind of recap, I think that it's very important to build systems, probably outside of the scope of our episode today. But I think that the hiring piece, I think we've talked through this Joe case study and at least gotten that people component kind of dialed in. I can do a kind of like a recap, but any thoughts on the systems piece?
I think you touched on something that we actually incorporated into our kickoff call deck. Like we go through an hour-long call helping people onboard effectively, and we talk about adding in the quality assurance step. We talk about how simple it can be to hand off systems, or excuse me, to create systems, because most people, the reason they don't create them is because they overthink it. They've never done it really effectively. They think it's going to be this really time consuming process, but really, like you're saying, I always tell people, you pretend the sidekicks just sitting there with you at your desk, looking over your shoulder. Just explain what you're doing on camera, just like that. So I think that there's tons of alignment there. And I think that you can't make an excuse for not just clicking a button and talking about what you're doing. Like, there is no extra effort except for maybe a couple extra words. And then you can hand that to somebody, and then they know exactly what to do. And then they can turn it into the really pretty documentation, and they can build it into whatever, you don't make that your responsibility. If you can get the stuff out of your head, then that's 90% of the battle. The other piece that I would say is, if you hire someone who is worth their salt, it is the fastest way to get your time back. Like, I've never seen anything there. You can use AI, you can use all these systems, you can have these cool tools and whatever. Like, there are a million different things that you can use to get your time back, but there is nothing that is more impactful quicker, in my experience, than putting a new body in there to do the things. And so the reason I bring that up is because you can unbury yourself fairly quickly. It doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if that person is even giving you 60% of what they could potentially be giving you back, you got hours back each day. You've got hours of your time back. And then that's where you go and you take an hour or two here and there and you build the system. And then, those are the things where you start to leverage your time more effectively, so that no matter what, once you've created the system, even if that person gets eaten by a shark or abducted by aliens, you can bring in another media buyer and say, here's the system I created for how we do this. And you've leveraged their time to make sure that you've got the system, and that your business just can, if you extrapolate that out across all the things that you do repeatedly, then it becomes something where your entire operation is documented. Obviously, there are going to be ad hoc tasks, and there are going to be things that you need to just spin up on the fly. There's no business that doesn't have the inevitable kind of onesie, twosie projects and things like that. But I don't know a business that does, that where they're doing any less than, I'd say, 70, 80% of the things that they do very, very predictably, very repeatably. And I would say that the vast majority are doing somewhere between 80 and 90% of their activity on that kind of repeatable, predictable basis. And so that's where I find that you do what you can to get some impact from the people that you bring in. And then you don't just squander that and go and drink beers and watch football. Like, go and take that time so that that investment is then going to, regardless of what happens in your business, you've got those assets, you've built that infrastructure. So I think that there's tons more we can talk about in terms of what to do with Joe. And if Joe were here and we could, he could pose some questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them, because we can go real specific and get really, really nerdy with this. But I think that all I'd encourage is that, like you said, Jesse, this is a situation where both of us are known to be very generous with our time and information and things like that. Like, we genuinely want to help people, because this is a scenario where we see the potential of entrepreneurship squandered, and most people are suffering in their business in the situation when they come to either one of us, because there are a few little things that they can do to polish and maybe sometimes big changes, but like, there are some things that are glaringly obvious to you and I that they just are missing. And I would much rather, share some information, answer some questions, and help people just have that light bulb go off than, I just want to second that. Like, reach out and ask some questions, because this is stuff that there's more of a mission to this work than most people understand, and that we let on in some cases. So just want to make sure that people understand that, like, there's certainly hope, and don't hesitate to spark up a conversation, because I think it's a worthwhile investment of your own time.
Mm-hmm. That's huge, and that kind of leads towards the end of the interview. And I do want to second what you're saying right now, because Niche Control is my fourth business. My first three, I was Joe, and I actually dissolved businesses because I couldn't get the freedom back. And so it's a personal kind of like mission of mine to impact 1 million entrepreneurs. And I think that even just the starting of Heroes and Sidekicks for you turned into something that's very personable and purposeful, because we see this all the time. And I think it's really important if anybody is resonating with like seeing themselves in Joe to either reach out to either one of us. And I'll include a link to Nick. And I know, what do you do in the first meeting? Is it like a hiring strategy, or how does that work?
Basically, all we do on that first call is just define the problem and the need. Like in a lot of cases, people are trying to solve the problem the best way they know how. But because, like, we've done this, I don't have an exact number. Let's just say for sake of a range, we've helped people hire between 200 and 300 people over the last few years. I'd say closer to, we're probably over 300 at this point if I actually go back and look. But the reason I share that is because we have so many data points to say, well, based on the way that you're presenting this problem, this is how I would solve it. And I don't want to pretend like I'm the end all be all expert. There are far more smart people out there than I am. But what I can tell you is we help people do this all the time. And so regardless of whether or not you want to hire through us or hire with, go and find somebody else on your own, or, whatever the solution may be, that's what we come to on that conversation. Sometimes people aren't ready. We have minimums that we have to hit with our engagements. We expect people to work with their sidekicks 15 hours a week. Sometimes people just need to go on Upwork and hire somebody for 5 hours a week or 3 hours a week or whatever, because that's a good starting point for them. Oftentimes people end up with, they think they want to hire role A, but really role B is going to be far more impactful, far more quickly. And then they can hire role A in, 3, 6, 9 months, whatever it is. So it's really about, and one of the things I'll say is I used to have salespeople. I used to have, this used to be a business where we do a lot of really aggressive marketing. I take all of our discovery calls now because of the exact point that I'm making right now. Like, I have so much data to go off that I want to make sure that call is just as value packed as possible. So yeah, like you said, Jesse, I'm happy to speak to people. It's something where it's about helping people more than anything else,
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah.
Nick, I have a feeling like the Joes of the world that are listening to this are going to send us some questions, and maybe we'll do it again, and maybe how hiring like mixes with systems, and we could go down that rabbit hole, or we could talk about management. We could talk about a lot of things. So if anybody is listening to this and you want me and Nick to kind of dive into a certain topic or a certain question or anything like that, feel free to reach out. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And so it's LinkedIn, Jesse P. Gilmore. But what's the best way if people wanted just to connect with you? And then I'll also include the link if people are into a place where they want to figure out the hiring piece and talk to you as well. I'll include that in the show notes. But is there a certain social media or something that you direct them towards?
I think that based on my own personal communication channels and my preferences, I would say jumping on the email list, getting the occasional email from us, and then, or, you can email back with questions, things like that. I'm an inbox zero guy. So that's the reason I say that, is because I will clear out my inbox and respond to you the same day. Whereas my social inboxes, you might be waiting a day or a week or potentially more, because I'm just not as active on social as I once was. So yeah, if I'll leave a link for how to connect with that list and make sure that, you've got direct access to me via that as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for sharing your insights today. I thought it has been a lot of fun, and obviously we have a lot in common when it comes to different strategies and the expertise with it. And for anybody, again, for anybody that's listening that sees themselves in Joe, I would suggest getting a call with Nick and being able to kind of diagnose the hiring piece. Systems are kind of my thing as well. So, but thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. And I think that, I want to second that point. I think one of the reasons that we can have these conversations so organically is because we have very complementary ways that we help people. We do our best. We're very hands-on with clients, but the fact is that we can't invest the time based on our engagement structures. We can't invest the time to really dial down into your specific business the way that Jesse does. So I think that, the nice thing over the last few years, if Jesse has mentioned, like, he's been able to send us folks that he's working with. And the cool thing about it is when you have somebody like Jesse being the kind of strategic mad scientist behind the scenes with you, helping to design, hey, define, this is what we need to hire. And, here are the systems that we're building, and here's the infrastructure that needs to be created to support that person, set them up for success. Like, it's this kind of double whammy effect. And the cool thing about it is, like, you've got really approachable guys that can solve the problem from, multiple directions. And I think that it's really necessary in a lot of cases. So by all means, Jesse's a very humble guy, but I would say make sure that if you're in a position where you are experiencing Joe syndrome, you got to talk to Mr. Jesse here.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate you, Nick, and I'm sure that we'll do this again in the next couple of months. But thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Agency owners, if you want to transform your agency to sustain and grow without your direct involvement, where you can stop working in the business and start working on the business, where you can free up your time, delegate work more effectively, price and position your services to finally get paid for what you're worth, and have the team run the day-to-day, go to nicheandcontrol.com/case study now to learn more about leverage for growth. And also to book a free strategy session with us. We'll look at your systems, determine exactly what you need to do in order for you to scale this year, and to create a strategic plan so that you can live the life of entrepreneurship you've always dreamed about. Go to nicheandcontrol.com/case study now.